Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Talking Torah. This is another one of our weekly discussions over the Torah portion. My name is Jeff Gilbert, and you can reach me at www.talkingtorah.org. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me.
Doesn't take a lot of money, doesn't take you far from home. Even heard of someone learning Torah on the phone. All it takes is desire, all it takes is time. Seems I have some extra, can I give you some of mine? Let's talk some Torah. Let's talk some Torah. It's okay if you will see that we're bound to disagree. Don't have to see eye to eye to make the Torah come alive. Now that I've had my say, let's not waste the whole day. Let's talk some Torah. Let's talk some Torah. We're talking Torah. Talking Torah.
Okay, Barakim V'Nevrahim, everybody. We're so happy you're with us again for another one of our, this is a special recording with our roundtable with with your host, Yoel Halavi, and myself, Jeff Gilbert. And today we're going to be discussing something that we've been kind of dropping hints on over the last last month or two, on the Ger.
Try 6.
Yeah, well, hey, yeah, it has been quite a while. About the Ger, about the idea of who is involved within the covenant of God and how you become involved with the covenant of God. There's a lot of people who are talking about different concepts around Ger and Noahide. We're not. I don't believe Yoel has any intention, and I don't have any intention of causing any friction with those teachers or teachings. We're just bringing up a viewpoint that should at least be, thought about when you're considering the idea of Ger. So with that, Yoel, kind of how do you want to frame what we're going to talk about today?
Okay, so first of all, before we even begin discussing this thing, the reality of a Ger, the reality of a convert is not a very simple one. And the conduct that I personally see from my experience with people who converted to Judaism is, I would say, sometimes very, very problematic, because the treatment of such people is, I don't want to say degrading, because it's not necessarily the intent. However, I have spoken with quite a few people throughout the years who have been, I don't know exactly what the word will be here, but they were very offended in the way people spoke to them. If it be a rabbi or another Jew or whatever it might be, someone in a school which they were teaching about conversion, whatever it might be. And I sat down with my father, who happened to be involved in several conversion cases as part of the Beit Din that converted. And we had a very, very long discussion about this. My dad was actually even willing to go on a recording to do this, but we never really got around to do the recording because we were focusing on his visit. And we went back and forth quite a few times, trying to understand the nature of this thing that we call conversion, or the Gerut. It's called Tahalich Giyur, a process of conversion, and trying to understand the biblical side of it, the Jewish side of it. I was really looking from the biblical perspective as a Bible scholar. My dad was looking at more of the practical side of Jewish halacha, of Jewish law. And then we also, both of us as historians, were looking at it from an historical perspective, from what each one of us knew. And we've both understood that there's a problem in the way people define this entire thing. And obviously, my dad and I disagreed on the whole idea of what is a ger, because my dad, coming from a rabbi's perspective, as a person who wants the Jewish structure to continue to be the one that leads everything, and on the other hand, me coming from a much more biblical perspective, where I strongly disagreed with some of the ideas presented. But we both realized that there's a lot of problematic understanding behind this. And there's this big promotion of the status of a ger, of going to people and saying, you know what, you're a ger. But people say this word without really understanding what it means. And without really understanding what it does to the individual when you say such a thing. So, if you understand the context of such a word from its original meaning, a lot of people will actually be very offended. And because I have a relative who's a convert and is not ashamed of the fact that he converted, however, for him, he's a little unusual. You know, he's not annoyed by the fact that people remind him that he used to be a Christian. Actually, by the way, he was a Catholic back in the day when he was still living with his parents. And I know of a few more other converts and others that I've met. When you remind them of their past, some of them even reach a point where they start tearing because they realize that their past is something that can be shameful as well. You know, if you had a person who was a high priest of Baal, and the guy has a change of heart and decides to be a follower of the God of Israel, and they're going to go and mention, by the way, you worship Baal, you know, you worship one of the worst enemies of Israel, how do you think that person will feel?
True.
You want to push that away from the person's past. You don't want to mention the fact that he's a ger. You want his history to completely be erased and treat him as an equal, the way the Torah actually tells people to treat them. And not going around calling them a ger, or disguising it with names like ger tzedek and stuff like that. Because ger does not mean what a lot of people think it means.
What does ger mean?
So, you know, I think the best thing to do is look at the first appearance of the word ger. And where's the first appearance that we have the word ger? So I'm old school, I don't use computer programs. I use books. I think computer programs is when people want to be lazy. Learn the material, people.
I deal with big humidity problems here. I've got a leather-bound Bible here that I haven't touched in a month, and it's green. So computer programs aren't just for the lazy.
Except in your cases. But I have a philosophy that says if you want to know it, you have to own it. Okay? So let's take the first example of the word ger. Okay? And the first time we have the word ger, okay, is in Genesis 15:13. It says, "Ger yeh zaracha be'eretz lo lahem." Okay, so what is the context here? God speaks to Abraham and he says he's going to have a seed that's going to continue his legacy. They're going to continue the way of the Lord, as it appears in chapter 18. And he says to him, your children are going to be a ger in a land that does not belong to them. So what do we understand from this context? A ger is a person who lives. The word ger comes from the root gur, which means to dwell. You are dwelling in a place that does not belong to you.
It's almost like the way the brothers were treating the sons of the handmaids, it seems.
I don't want to skip there yet.
Okay.
I want to first of all understand this word from its actual core. There's a very, very interesting book that came out. It's a very expensive book. And, I say expensive because really most people hear the price, they go like, it's expensive. But it's actually called Knowledge, Control, and Sex. And it's a book. It was written by Professor Malul from the Haifa University, and it's a book that's dedicated to the idea of understanding a world expressed in a book according to its original meaning. In other words,
from Christians would say the law of first mention or something like that.
What? I'm not too sure that.
Yeah,
means.
they have a term we heard a lot back in the church days. The law of first mention, where it's first mentioned, that sets the tone of later mentionings.
Yeah, that doesn't work. That doesn't fit. Not in Hebrew.
Good point.
Sorry.
Good point. Okay, go ahead.
It doesn't work like that. Context. Every time you have a case, look at the actual case. Forget about the first time it appears. Okay,
but we're just talking about the first time in this case because we're just starting off someplace.
Well, here the thing is it's kind of consistent in this case.
Beautiful. Okay, good.
If you look at all the examples, it's relatively consistent. So the book itself, just read the preface, whatever it's called, a preface, something like that. I can't remember what it is now.
Preface, yeah.
Preface, okay. And he basically goes into this lengthy discussion about the fact that when a lot of people read the Bible, they project their own world of philosophies and ideas and so on
True.
into
Through their own colored glasses.
Exactly. But we have to understand this verse is really the core of understanding the whole concept of what is a ger. A ger is a social status. Okay? It's a social status which is strongly connected to the place you dwell in. So a ger is not only a stranger, but he's also a stranger living in a place that's not really his home. Does this fit the description of a person who's fully committed to the Torah and the God that gave it to the people who follow it? Okay. So what we see here, and if I just go over all the examples of the word ger which appear everywhere, a ger is always a person whose status is lower than a native born. And the ger is not a person who belongs to the people. However, the ger is also a protected status. Because a ger is protected by the law of the Torah, which says if a stranger comes to dwell with you, you must treat them as the law treats everyone else. Mm-hmm. They don't have rights as a native born. They don't have a say in any decisions. They can't practice things which are nationalistic. Okay, like for example the Passover. However, if they decide to do the Passover, then their status changes. Okay? So,
wait, you should probably explain that for those who just keyed on what you just said.
Okay, so when we look through the Torah, I was actually about to do it, but in any case, the Torah basically tells us that there is a conversion process. And the conversion has a very, very nationalistic idea behind it. It's a conversion which is a commitment to the God, but it's also a conversion which is a commitment to the people. And that's really what a ger is. Actually, no, that is what a person who used to be a non-Israelite, who becomes an Israelite. Mm-hmm. The status of ger is before the person actually converts. Okay? And what is this process? And this is something
it's kind of like limbo. They're not really an outsider, but they're not one of us. So they're kind of like in
exactly.
limbo.
Exactly. You have people who come and dwell with you, who are interested in your ways, who want to be part of your people.
Protected without unique rights.
Exactly. So when you look at this in this way, you need to understand what makes an Israelite an Israelite. And what makes an Israelite are two things. Two things that don't necessarily have to coexist. One is to be born an Israelite, like I was. Okay, I was born to a father and mother who are descendants of Israel, and therefore by birthright I am an Israelite, and I get the perk to be a Levite. Haha. And sorry. And or
shameless plug.
Or go through the Passover, which is the point in time where Israel becomes Israel. Okay? And this deed of becoming Israel is reenacted every year in the Passover celebration. And that's the opening, that's that little window that a person who wants to become an Israelite can walk through or climb through. I say more like walk through. And then become...
Climb through might key some Christians in a different direction.
When they go through the process of the Passover, that's when they unite their person with the general people of Israel. Because that's also the point in history when Israel becomes the nation. We start seeing the movement towards a nation in the stories of Jacob. Like, for example, when Dinah is raped, it says that, this is not how it is done in Israel. We already start seeing a feeling of nationality. As a tribe, as a group of people who have a code that they go by. However, the point where Israel becomes Israel is the Passover and the Exodus, and this is why it's reenacted every year. It's to remind us where we came from. It also reminds us where we're going to.
When you choose to go through a Passover, you're choosing to become part of the nation. That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. I remember years ago, a friend of mine turned around to me. We were talking about Pesach. We were sitting the day of Chag HaMatzot, the first day. He invited me to his house, and we sat there with my family. And he said something very, very interesting. A very good friend of mine is a very interesting rabbi, and he says, "This is the day when each one of us walks out from the interior office with our ID cards that says Israel."
Oh, or you could say, this is the day when we are no longer Ger.
No, that's not what he said. And
no, but when you think about what, I mean, because Israel was Ger in Egypt, and when they come out of Egypt, they are now Israel, a nation equal to other nations on the earth. They are no longer Ger on this day.
Okay, that's not really the direction I was going to, but I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. That is also a correct way of looking at it. I agree with that 100%. But the point was that he mentioned this idea, and I never thought of it in that way. And then from that point on, I started thinking, and then I saw an article that talked about the whole idea of the Passover being the actual conversion of someone into the people of Israel. It's really interesting because one of the misconceptions that people do in biblical Hebrew is that they go to the verses that talk about the Passover, and they quote that verse, and I'm going to open up the verse in a second. Again, old school, using books. What will you do if there's no technology? You have to go learn how to read books.
You better get your books out and get the mold off of them. But I have to say, I've enjoyed getting my books back out since now I'm at the house. I can actually get my reading glasses out and read while we're talking through it. It's wonderful.
So we're looking at Exodus 12, okay? And I'm going to read this in Hebrew from beginning to end, and then maybe if Jeff wants to translate, he can translate. If not, I'll just focus on the point.
No, go for it.
Okay, so this is verses 43 all the way to verse 15. It says, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'Aharon, Zot chukat ha'Pasach, kol ben nechar lo yochal bo, v'chol eved ish miknat kasef, umalta oto, az yochal bo. תושב ושכיר לא יאכל בו. בבית אחד יאכל, לא תוציא מן הבית מן הבשר חוצה, ועצם לא תשברו בו. כל עדת ישראל יעשו אותו. וכי יגור איתך גר ועשה פסח לאדוני, הימו לו כל זכר, ואז יקרב לעשותו, והיה כאזרח הארץ. I'm going to repeat this one, כאזרח הארץ, and this is one of the key points. וכל ערל לא יאכל בו. תורה אחת יהיה לאזרח, ולהגר הגר בתוככם. That was verse 49, a very important verse as well. ויעשו כל בני ישראל כאשר ציווה אדוני את משה ואת אהרון כן עשו.
Beautiful. Okay, so and Yehovah said to Moshe and to Aharon, this is the law of the Passover. No son of a, I'm assuming ger, is to eat of it. No? Okay.
Ben Nechar.
Okay, Ben Nechar.
Key element number one.
Okay. But any servant of a man he has bought with silver. When you have circumcised him, then let him eat it. A sojourner and a hired servant does not eat of it. It is eaten in one house. You are not to take any of the flesh outside of the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. All of the congregation of Israel are to perform it. And when a stranger sojourns with you and shall perform the Passover...
That's our ger. That's the ger.
Okay, so that was the ger. Okay, good. Okay, and when a ger sojourns with you and shall perform the Passover to Yehovah, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and perform it. And he shall be as a native of the land, but let no uncircumcised eat it. There is one Torah for the native born and for the stranger who sojourns with you.
Okay, very good. So, this bunch of verses defines several categories of types of people. And this is where we start seeing the differences between these different groups. So, he says this is the law of the Passover. When it says chokah, this is the way it's done. There's no way to change it. Usually when the word is chokah, it's like a constitution. Okay? It's constitutional that you have to do the Passover in this way and you can't change the constitution. Okay?
And that would make the red heifer similar?
Yes, you do not ask questions why it's like this. You just do it.
Wow.
That's
okay.
usually
it's a law.
usually
I don't have to explain why.
law.
You just do it. I like that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So first it says, "Kol ben nechal lo yochal bo." Anyone who is a foreigner, ben nechal. The word for someone who is not an Israelite is a nochri, a ben nechal. Okay. When people use the word goy, it's incorrect because goy just means nation. It's actually a word used to express identification of an entire group of people. Mm-hmm. When someone turns around and says, "Oh, look, it's a goy," yeah, you're misusing the word. It's not
Israel
how
is called
it's
goy as
used.
well.
Mika Mechai Israel goy echad ba'aretz. Who's like your nation Israel, one goy in the land.
Amen.
Okay. So
let me ask real quick. You said ben Nahal, and I'm just wondering. Just a Hebrew question. How close is that to Nahash?
Not even remotely close.
Okay, just a question. Go ahead.
Nechar nun chaf resh, nachash nun chet shin. Wait for my videos on biblical Hebrew. You'll see the differences.
Beautiful.
Actually, I already have a video that explains that even some roots which are spelled exactly the same are not necessarily from the same stock. Look it up. Some interesting videos on YouTube.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So ben nechal basically means anyone who is a stranger, a son, a descendant of the families of the ones who are not Israel. Period. So he is forbidden from eating in it, which means he's forbidden from participating in the production of the Passover. I apologize for my tongue refusing to do its job. And then it says, V'chol eved, anyone who is a servant. And the thing is that a person who is a servant, an eved, a slave, that person, when they're technically, I'm going to say, kind of adopted into the family. So by buying the person, and there are different laws of slavery, but by buying the person now is the property of the man who owns him. Mm-hmm. Okay? And therefore, we're not talking about an Israelite. We're talking someone that was bought as a slave on the slave markets of the international slave markets, which are people who are not Israelites. Right. But when the person is bought as the property of an Israelite, that person becomes part of the household and therefore is technically, I'm going to say, kind of adopted into the family. So this person being part of this thing called Israel from this point onwards, if they want to participate in the Passover, they need to be circumcised. And only then he's allowed to eat from it. So we see either being an Israelite or being a slave bought with money of an Israelite, and by that becoming part of the household. So this is the second type of person that can eat from the Passover. But it says toshav v'sachir lo yochal bo. What is this thing called toshav and sachir? Start with the second one. Sachir comes from the word sachar, which is a person who is paid for work. This can be anyone, a person who's a mason or a carpenter or a blacksmith, whatever it might be. And this person travels. He doesn't dwell in one place, or he does have a home, but he's been imported. Like for example, during the times of King Solomon, he was imported to do work. So he's here just as he's on a visa here. He's on a working visa. He has absolutely no connection whatsoever to anything that has to do with your nation, except for the fact that he has to abide to certain rules, which is obviously something you do in any country. If you have someone visiting, they stamp their passport and he comes in, he has to abide to those laws. Obviously, there are some, you can be a little bit more forgiving if a person breaks the law, especially if they're a foreigner, and explain to them that they broke the law and maybe, find a way to take care of the problem. But the next word is the word toshav. Now, toshav comes from the word yashav, which means to sit, to dwell. This is a person that is in the land, is not part of Israel, however has probably certain rights of living in the land as being someone who is an emissary or a protected person that fled to your country. He dwells with you. Okay? He dwells with you and nothing else. He doesn't have any rights he has no rights as an Israelite. He has nothing to do with your people. He follows his own gods or whatever it might be. And there's a reason he lives here. He's not here temporarily, like for example, a sachir. He is here to dwell here probably for a very, very long time. Like for example, Chever HaKeni, which were a group of people who dwelled in the land of Israel, and they were respected and protected. However, they were not Israelites and therefore did not have the rights of Israelites, but they had a right to dwell in the land.
Is this the Kenizzites? Who did you say? The Keni?
Not the Kenizzite, the Keni.
Okay, the Keni.
Also known as the Kenites and Rahabites, if you remember that term.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
The Kenites and the Rahabites.
Yes, there's actually two interesting groups. I actually have a friend who wrote a thesis about the whole thing, and I actually sent it from cover to cover. It was very interesting. And they were a group of people that dwelled amongst the Israelites, were not Israelites, probably didn't even follow the God of Israel, or maybe they followed the God of Israel in some other way where they, mix things together. They might have practiced syncretism, but in any case, they were allowed to dwell in the land. Another group that's similar to that of the Gibeonites, the Giv'onim. They were allowed to dwell in the land. However, they were punished for their lie, and they become the servants.
The old bread thing.
Yeah, they become the netinim. These are already from the root natan. They're given. These are servants. However, they do have a status of a toshav because they're allowed to dwell in the land, though they're not Israelites.
Good point.
Okay?
Good point. Okay.
Okay, so remember, notice the fact that a lot of the discussion here has to do with the fact that you're actually sitting in the land. We have to remember that from the biblical perspective, it all connects up to the whole idea of living on the land, living in the land, and being your sovereign nation on its own land. It's a very, very strong element in the entire idea of who Israel is. And this, by the way, ties up a little bit into the whole discussion, actually ties up a lot into the whole discussion of conversion, how it's done today and how it's perceived today. Then he goes into a whole list of things of, how do you do the Passover? But then verse 48 says the following: if a sojourner, if a person who is a ger, a person who is dwelling with you. However, here we're dealing with a person with a completely different status. This is not a toshav. This is a person who came from the outside and wants to dwell with you as one of you. He wants to abide to your laws. For example, when Avraham says, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, he's telling them, I am dwelling amongst you. I am not one of you. This is why he says the word toshav, but I'm also a ger. I am willing to abide to your laws. He's not just saying ger v'toshav anochi imachem as if there's a thing called a ger toshav. Not what he's saying. He's saying ger v'toshav in the sense of I am a complete foreigner, but I'm anyhow dwelling here and I'm willing to abide to your laws. And by the way, I'm planning on putting up a recording that I made about that section in the book of Genesis, which would explain a lot of what goes on there. Hopefully, if I remember, I'll try to put it up very soon. That was from a private session I did with a group that I teach. And it will really clarify a lot of what goes on there. So here, he says, this is a ger. This is not a ben nechal. This is not a ish miknat kasef. This is not a toshav. This is not a sachir. This is a ger. So obviously the ger does not belong to any of the above categories, and therefore we can assume, I think quite clearly, that the ger is already a person who came as like a toshav. He came to dwell amongst you. However, he is already willing to abide completely to your laws. However, he cannot be an Israelite until he does the Passover. He does the Passover. He has to circumcise. Only then is he allowed to approach to do the sacrifice. Interesting, the word korban comes from the word karav, which means to draw near. It's a very interesting idea. I talk about some of that, a bit more details in some other opportunity that we might have. But it says, V'haya ke'ezrach haaretz. Now here is the problem. The kaf being used here is, in many people's mind, the idea of kaf of likeness. That something resembles something, but not exactly the same. However, the kaf here is not a kaf of likeness, it's a kaf of exactness. This is when the person, this ger, does the Passover, he is an Israelite. Not as, not like. It says he is an Israelite from that point onwards. Okay?
And he shall be as a native born. So that's what you're saying. That's the kaf of likeness. He's actually not. It's not a similar issue. He is literally. No. Okay.
When you say kaf of likeness, you mean that there's a resemblance, but they're not exactly the same. There's another kaf, which is a kaf.
And this is of exactness. I'm sorry. Yes.
Of exactness. The kaf means he is exactly as you are.
Right. I said the wrong word, but yeah, I'm with you. That's perfect. Okay. Good. So you are literally Israel from the time you circumcise and take the Passover.
Exactly. But obviously there was a study process before that. This is why the person can't convert whenever they want. They show up, convert me. They can show up sometime near the Passover, and they have to start learning. And, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll do for example, if they show up a month before the Passover, they might tell them, wait another year. Okay, so the waiting process is something that actually can be understood from the Tanakh. You don't just show up and become an Israelite. You need to go through there's a study curve that you have to go through. You have to learn things.
Agreed. However, in the story that you're bringing up here, it doesn't allow for that necessarily, right? You're talking about later applications. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying that it's possible to argue that when a person shows up at the doorsteps of Israel and says, I want to convert, they will probably tell him, okay, you have to wait for the Passover. So even if the person shows up a month before, there's still a month for them to learn. Okay, I'm not saying you have to study now for 2 years and only then you convert. Sure, especially in the world of today where information is abundant and you can find online courses and you can learn biblical Hebrew from this teacher called Yoel Halevi, and you can study biblical studies. You can also study from him. Yeah, I'm doing some self-promotion.
It's good.
I have to do
it. Go ahead.
Okay, let's carry on. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to be kind of funny and positive about everything. But seriously, I actually do well for Hebrew lessons. And you can, go and study with a rabbi and study about Judaism and so on. You can already arrive at a conversion process with a lot of knowledge to begin with. However, back then you didn't have that. A person will show up and probably hear about something they've never heard before. Monotheism. I mean, it did exist a bit here and there prior to the Israelites, but as an actual system and something that's practiced by the entire nation with no rebellions and so on, that was kind of unheard of. And a person will have to learn some of the basics. Don't worship idols, don't do this, don't do that. And really, Maimonides says, when a person converts, we tell him the basics of what Judaism is. We tell them the basics of, what is the Sabbath and what is kosher and so on, and they learn throughout time. So what is done today is a little excessive, because Maimonides really says the exact opposite of that. Modi'inu miktzat mitzvot HaTorah, kalot shebaim, v'chamorot shebaim, something like that, when he says you teach him, you let him make it known parts of the Torah. Obviously, you're going to go over some of the most important basics, like, idol worshipping and Shabbat, and circumcision, and in some places you can also argue kashrut, kosher food, and so on. And then you convert the person. The person does not have to walk into the conversion process with a diploma saying, I am a full-fledged academic.
I'm a graduate of Rabbi U.
Yeah, there's no need for that. The person needs to know the basics. So based on what Maimonides says, a lot of people
just kind of know what you're getting into. You kind of need to know what you're getting into. That's really part of the idea. You don't want to sign a contract and then realize, I haven't read the contract yet, and then you realize I got to give up my left arm.
Yeah, exactly. Or there was once this joke that someone said that if you actually look through it, you discover you sold your soul to the devil or something. Yeah. Someone once told me there was a joke someone made about it once.
That joke would be applied to fitness club contracts. Let me tell you, man.
Well, I actually do something very funny. When I walk in the bank and I sign something, I actually read it. And the clerk usually looks as if it fell off the moon. I was like, I'm going to read through this.
Yeah. And like on computer programs, everybody just scrolls to the end and clicks accept.
Yeah.
Yeah, people generally don't read. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, so there needs to be some type of allowance for somebody to understand what they're getting into. In the first example here in Exodus 12, there was an awful lot that's been going on for this time. This context was rife with a lot of knowledge of what people were getting into, so it's not necessarily here. But later in practical applications, you can see where that was practiced, that there was a bit of a ramping up before people were accepted in. Sounds like.
It seems to be that you have to know, you have to learn at least to some degree what you're getting into. How much you actually have to know is an interesting thing. I have to also understand what Judaism really looks like from the inside. It's not a very simple thing. There's a lot of beauty to Judaism. However, growing up inside Judaism, inside Orthodox Judaism,
you get to see all the cracks.
you get to see a lot of the cracks. A lot of, you would not believe. I'm going to tell you a story. When I was in high school, I started growing long hair.
No.
I was a teenager. By the way, our ancestors had long hair. Israelites had long hair.
I like long hair, unless the humidity's 100% for 6 months out of the year.
Yeah. The thing was, I grew long hair. It started really becoming lengthy. So I tucked everything up underneath a kippah. I had this big kippah I was wearing, a yarmulke.
So you tucked your hair under your hat and you went in to ask him why? Sorry, old song.
So one day I was pulling on my tefillin, and a lock of hair fell off, and you could see it was a big chunk of hair. It was very long. So the rabbi sees this and calls me in to the office. And
so, Absalom, how long have you been growing your locks?
So he says, well, it's forbidden to have long hair. And I said, it says whom? It says so in the Talmud. I said, no, that's not true. Rabbi Yochanan had long hair. Oh, okay. But it prevents the tefillin from touching your head. And I said, the Shulchan Aruch says that you can put your tefillin on a small piece of cloth or something if you get head colds. So he says to me, well, it's not the way Jews do it. I said, the Chatam Sofer had long hair, and he looked at me. He actually stared at me.
Boy, you talk too much.
He looked at me and he said, well, the two things I've noticed here. First of all, we taught you well. And I said, what's the second thing? I'm telling you to trim your hair.
Yeah, right. You're under my roof, boy. You're going to trim your hair.
So that's what I said to him. I said, Rabbi, if that's the reason, I'm willing to do it. And he said,
yeah,
what do you mean? I said, this is your school, and I'm willing to abide to your rules.
Absolutely.
However, if you're going to stand there and make up a whole pile of nonsense about why I'm not allowed to have long hair, I'm not going to accept that. And he said, so that's the reason why you're willing to trim your hair? And I said, yeah, absolutely. The next thing I did is I came back bald. And I said, you told me to trim my hair. You never told me how long it should be. He hated me. He loved me and he hated me simultaneously. But that's kind of the problem that we have with Judaism. Judaism kind of does a lot of hula hoops to try to prove things, to try to get, squares into circles or whatever, or circles into squares, whatever the saying
square
is.
Square peg, round hole, yeah.
No, a square peg in a round hole, exactly. So the thing that we have a problem here with is that in time, Judaism had undergone some changes, some pretty radical changes. Being Jewish was not necessarily dwelling in your home. It was no longer an issue of dwelling in the land. It became a religion that was able to transport itself to other places. The Torah scroll became the center of everything. The temple was something in Jerusalem, but we have synagogues as well. We don't have to dwell in the land to be close to our God, which, by the way, David says the opposite. He says, they told me to go dwell in foreign lands and worship foreign gods. Dwelling in the land was part of the idea of being Israel. It was a completely different concept because being Israel was a nationalistic idea, which Jews were trying to come away from because they understood that nationalism brought kingship brought depravity brought destruction brought exile put us in this horrible place. Therefore, we do no longer want to be a nationalistic group of people. And this is where we have no problem dwelling outside of the land. However, for it to fit their ideology of the Torah and everything, they had to change a lot of the concepts. And that's where the trouble began. And there was a group of Jews who came from Babylon and said, no, we're going to return to the land. We're going to establish,
Ezra, Nehemiah,
exactly, we're going to establish our own group of people, and we're going to be holier than thou. And these were the extreme nationalistics. But what they did was they wanted...
Would you call them Zionists, by the way?
No, because they were Jerusalemites. They were only Jerusalem. It was a very, very extreme expression of Judean ideology. And this is one of the things, Judean ideology. Remember that concept. Okay? Remember that concept. Because that was the point when the concept of the Ger changed. Judean ideology. There's a very, very interesting book written by Sarah Yefet about the book of Chronicles. She's the Chronicle lady. She's the big expert on the book of Chronicles. It's a very, very interesting book. The third chapter in the book talks about the issue of who is a Jew. There's a chapter that talks about who is the God of Israel, what is the book of Chronicles, who is a Jew. and so on. And there's also a very interesting discussion in the academic world. Were the foreign women really sent away? What we see in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, it's really...
For those who don't know, you're fixing to explain it.
I was about to talk about it.
Yes, you are on the ball.
Down, boy, down. So in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, for those who are not hearing the edited parts, we're having a lot of fun sometimes as well in the recording. So we find in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, which is, by the way, one book in the Hebrew Bible, so if I say Ezra and Nehemiah as one name, we find this phenomenon that this group of people arrive in Jerusalem and they talk down, to read very closely at it, but they talk down to the people that they call the Samaritans. And they say, you're not Israelites, you're from these people that were brought from the exile. You're those Kutites and so on who were brought from the exile. It's not necessarily untrue. There was a group of people here from that point, from that place. However, when you look at the numbers that were exiled during the times of the Assyrians and the Babylonians, it wasn't everyone. We're talking about several tens of thousands of people, when the numbers dwelling in the land were probably hundreds of thousands, if not close to 1 million people. So only
and for those who came out of the church, this is something that's readily discussed as the attitude towards the Samaritans during several of the orations. That they're dogs. They're less than us. He's hanging out with the Samaritans, and Samaritans apparently had a bad rap. From those later writings.
But that's all Jewish ideology. A lot of
Judean ideology.
Judean ideology. And
so that's where Judaism and Jews really come out of?
That's where Judaism really starts becoming Judaism. There was already a religion you could call Judaism in the First Temple period. They even had their own dialect and so on, and their own way of practicing the Torah and so on. However, this is the point where Judaism starts really breaking off from everything else. And what it seems to be is that this group of sectarians came in, looked at everyone else and said, submit to us or go away. And they saw themselves as the holy seed. This is, by the way, the beginning of the Dead Sea Scroll cults, sectarian groups.
Say that again? They began to see themselves as what?
As a holy seed.
Oh, the holy seed.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
This is how it seems to me. Now, again, to really go in depth into all of this, you have to go into the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, read it with commentary, and see some of the ideas there, and study. I took an entire course that dealt with this whole subject, and I'm not even done yet. There's another course I have to take which deals with it as well, at least part of it. But you see, from this point onwards, the beginning of new groups that see themselves as more important or holier than others. And if you don't belong to their group, you're not really Israel. And I think that this is also probably one of those points where Jews started thinking about the idea that in the First Temple period they allowed non-Jews to be amongst them. And they realized how much of a bad influence they were. This brought the destruction. This brought the foreign women and so on. So they started looking at anyone who is not following the Torah the way they want people to follow it, or anyone who is not really a Jew or a pure Israelite. These people are not part of Jewish people. And that's where the desegregation and the movement away from everyone else and labeling people really started. Because, for example, if you look at the First Temple period, in the book of Jeremiah, you have, for example, a man called Eved Melech HaKushi, and he's clearly of African descent. He's called a black man. And, by the way, if you remember, the word Kushi is not a derogative in Hebrew. People sometimes use it. However, it's not really a derogative in biblical Hebrew. And I stress this to a lot of people that it's not what people think it is, because I once went into this whole debate with someone and said, you use the N-word. I never used the N-word. Okay, I never did it. Oh, by the way, the N-word is just another word for saying black. It's But
it's a cultural thing, by the way. In the United States and in Britain, well, less so in Britain, but in the United States, it's taboo to mention the color of his skin, specifically if it's a black man. But like here in Costa Rica, I was sitting with a guy and he said, "Hola, negrita," and which means little black girl. And I'm like, dude, you can't say that. He goes, no, this is Costa Rica. This is normal. I said, well, you can't say that in the United States. You'll get mobbed.
Yeah, so I'm saying something very simple. I'm very aware of that, and I don't use it, even in everyday life. Even with close friends, I never use it, because I understand the connotations. Like, I don't want people to call me a kike or something like that. It's the same way. I try to show as much respect as I can. So, but the thing is, it is the word to describe someone who is not a Semite. However, this person was respected, was blessed, was dwelling amongst the Israelites and so on. People had no problem with foreigners back then. But after the destruction of the first temple, after the shock, as I sometimes call it, the post-traumatic stress syndrome that people started suffering after the destruction of the first temple, people started becoming very, very suspicious of anyone from the outside. And this is why they started calling people a ger, misusing the term. That's the idea that this person is not really a descendant of one of us. He's not really from the families that came here. He's not really one of us. But because the Torah says to treat the ger v'avtai ger, you have to love the ger v'avtai ger, it's not talking about a person who is an Israelite. It's talking about a person who has not gone through the full conversion process. And you have to love that person, because obviously if that person has gone through the Passover, he is no longer a ger. Now, by the way,
once they step on that process, once they board the train of understanding, you have to treat them as an equal passenger, right?
Exactly. When I meet someone and they say, "Oh yeah, I converted to Judaism," I say, "Welcome to the club." And I never use the word ger. I never use the word conversion. One of us. Okay?
Yeah.
So we've looked at the biblical perspective of it. Now we have to understand more deeply what happened later on. So in time, God was also perceived as a universal God. Before that, if you look through the Tanakh, all the way to around the book of Isaiah, God is more of a national God. He's our God. He has no connection with any...
The God of Israel.
Then in the Second Temple period, and I'm saying there are parts of Isaiah which I personally think were written in the Second Temple period, and there's quite abundant evidence of that, and it was unified into one book, because there were probably two people called Isaiah, and they were both prophets. That's my opinion. I agree with this idea. I know some people might find it offending, but I just, after years and years of deliberating this whole idea, I do not see the possibility of Isaiah of the First Temple period in the 7th, 8th century saying the things which appear from chapter 40 onwards. It just doesn't fit the time. Sorry. And there are things there which clearly indicate
good information.
Clearly indicate we're dealing with a different period. In any case, the thing is that from that point on, we start seeing God as more of a universal God, a God who's involved with the other nations. We see it with Jeremiah, we see it with Ezekiel, we see it in the second half of Isaiah. We start seeing God more as a God of the universe, of the bigger world, and so on. And God starts taking this persona of ruling over all nations. Now, we see hints of this idea in other places. However, here it becomes much, much bigger. So in the Second Temple period, people developed this idea, and now from this point onwards, there are no other powers except for the God of Israel. And this is, I know that what I'm saying here sounds as if that some people accepted the idea that there were other gods, and this is a whole discussion about the faith of Israel, which is probably one of the biggest
syncretism and so forth.
It's one of the biggest debates in biblical studies, period. Actually, there's this massive set of books, for example, called the history of the Israelite faith, which is a massive work written by Yechezkel Koifman. It's 4 volumes. Each volume is 2,000 pages or something. It's a big thing. So we're not really going to go into that discussion because I'm not even done having that discussion with myself and my teachers. However, we start seeing this universal idea. So if God is the God of the universe and God is the God of all of humanity, there must be something that God expects from all human beings. So they started developing this philosophy that, this must mean that there's a law that all humanity has to abide to. Now, taking the story of Genesis...
Sounds Noahide.
That's basically where I'm going with this. It seems to be that people started seeing this universal concept of God and started saying, okay, it must be that other human beings have to follow some kind of set of rules, and they start looking for these rules in the book of Genesis, and they start finding them. And they start saying, look, these are the laws of the Noahites. These are the laws that all sons of Noah, in other words, all human beings, must follow. The Torah doesn't say anything like this. The Torah gives a couple of commandments to all human beings, like don't eat blood, don't murder. Do you find there don't worship other gods? No. You only find two very simple things which are both connected to blood. Don't murder and don't eat blood. Respect life.
I agree with you, and there was one more, I believe, that should be added, and that is that those who bless, in the case of Shem, and in the case of Eber, and in the case of Avraham, those who bless shall be blessed. I count that as a law for the nations as well, personally.
I'm going to have to disagree with that one. I don't think it's a law. I think that it's more of an optional thing that if one blesses Israel, then one will be blessed. I don't think it's like a law of physics. You don't have to pay attention to it, but it just exists.
If you trip, you're going to fall down.
Exactly.
That's the law. I'm with you, but it's still considered a law, right?
No, I don't see a structure that might pertain to the idea of being a law. In any case, so people start picking out of the text these different things. So you really see a movement at one point that wants to see all of humanity abiding to the God of Israel. And I think it really connects to, for example, what appears in the book of Zechariah. Need to worship the God of Israel, but it doesn't say they have to abandon any other beliefs that they might have. So I don't really see in the Tanakh this full monotheistic idea that all mankind has to follow. One of the main problems is that you don't really find any of the 7 or 30, by the way, there are several opinions about this, Noahide laws. You don't really find them anywhere, and they're actually the fruit of Talmudic or rabbinic discussions on the premise of the idea that God is a universal God and expects all of mankind to follow him. However, when you go through the Torah, you don't really see anything like this. God gave the Torah to Israel, and it's open to anyone who wants to join. However, there's no subcategory, if you don't feel like doing the full course, you can do something smaller. There are these.
It's not like a cafeteria.
Yeah, it's not like as if you walk in and you have these options. When you walk into an office or into a cafeteria or a restaurant or whatever it may be, a gym or something, they give you a program. So this program for experts. You don't have anything like that in the Torah. You can comb the Torah for 100 years, you won't find anything like that. The Torah says, "I brought you out of Egypt. These are my laws, follow it. All of you want to be in that Torah? Here, the door's open, enter, join. You don't want to be it?
If you want to stay in the land, this is the rule book for living in the land. If you don't want to live by the rule book, I'm going to kick you out of the land.
Okay, and you're not here anymore, you just go over there, and the only thing I expect from you is respect life. Don't kill one another, and respect the animals that you eat. That's it. That's the only thing we see.
I want to ask you something. I want you to repeat that, because I want to make sure I understand what you said. When you're outside the land, respect life.
When you're outside of the land, okay, without going into the whole discussion, do you have to keep Torah outside of the land or not? The one thing that we find in the entire Tanakh of God expecting human beings to do, and this appears, by the way, in the covenant with Noah, and that's the core of it, respect life. Don't kill one another, and respect life, the animals around you. If you're gonna eat them, don't eat their blood, for their blood is their soul, and that's the essence of life. Don't touch that, because life is sanctified. Life is important, and if you're gonna be eating animals, you still have to respect them.
Very good point. So that's an interesting point. I kind of what I'm hearing you say, and I want to ask this question from a position of just going by what you've said in this recording. It sounds as if we could say that those who are in exile, and we could argue about whether or not those who are in the land today are part of that exile or not. I assume they are because the land is yet to be set apart, as we're told it's supposed to be different in the future, whenever He restores things. Not say there's anything that God's not blessing and God's not involved, but I'm just saying that this is not what's supposed to be yet.
Oh, stop being so tense.
I know, I just, because people listen to this and, you try to cover a couple bases.
Covering yourself from all angles, I know.
But aren't we all Ger? Because just like Abraham's, what God told Abraham, He says, your children shall be Ger. And when they come out of being a Ger in Egypt and become Israel, aren't we kind of in a similar position right now? Kind of like Abraham's seed has been, set out into becoming a Ger. We're told in Deuteronomy to expect this, especially if we go off serving other gods. And now we are in that we're in that same exile. Aren't we all expecting to be called back, to receive the call to return home? And aren't we all expecting a Passover event so that we can all become no longer Ger once again?
Well, the thing is that we don't really have information about how exactly the redemption process will be, and if there actually will be a necessity to do another Passover to bring everyone back. It will be an interesting idea if everything repeats itself in a similar pattern. I mean, it makes sense because we have patterns in the world. However, I don't really know if the concept of being a Ger in the sense that we're talking about fits what you're describing. I think that the status of Ger that you're talking about is the status of Ger of being in exile, which is not really the same as what we're talking about here, as a person who enters a foreign group of people and wants to join them. I don't think that you can actually connect these two dots together. However, you are understanding correctly what the term Ger is, which means not dwelling in your own homeland and having to abide to the laws of the land that you live in.
Agreed. Okay. So we have, within the context of today, we have this understanding, and we're going to call it Judean ideology, even though it's expanded far beyond that. But if we go back to what you're saying is the source of it, is we can call it Judean ideology. That is not necessarily what we are to return to leave being Ger.
In my opinion, as a Bible scholar, I understand that what is practiced today as Judaism has its origins in biblical practices. However, in time, many things changed due to the reality of the world that surrounds us. And therefore, when the redemption happens, I think that one of the things that's going to be corrected are the mistakes or potential mistakes or misunderstandings and so on and so forth done in the practice of the keeping of the Torah. And I think that a lot of things are going to be just said, okay, it was an interesting exercise, but it wasn't really it. But we're not really done with the concept of the Ger yet. Everyone rushes to the redemption and Mashiach. I mean, I see this everywhere. Redemption, Mashiach, and this, and the future. Let's focus about now for a second.
Agreed, but think about this. Just 1 second.
I'm not going to let you hijack the recording. No, I am pinning you down from a distance. I'm using my Jedi powers to that you calm down. No, that's not. Okay. No, it's not Jedi powers. It's the other side, the dark side. Oh,
right. That's right. No, the Jedis didn't do that. That's right. The Jedis were the good guys.
Okay. By the way, the story of Star Wars is kind of similar to the idea of redemption and so on, and a good prevailing over evil. Yeah. But in any case, I just want to finish categorizing everything, trying to explain them, and then we can go a whole discussion about the end of days if you want. But what we find in the Second Temple period is the creation of several categories of types of Ger to classify people, and I think not necessarily as a derogative idea. Maybe some did use it as a derogative, but I think most people just used it because that was the terminology that was used, because people moved words from one meaning to another. People changed the meaning of a word to mean something else. So at one point, the word ger was no longer its original meaning as appeared in the Tanakh, and people start using it in everyday life to what the Bible describes as a person who becomes ke'ezrach haaretz. But they start giving two categories. They start calling people ger tzedek and a ger toshav. Now, even if you comb the Bible back and forth in any version you want, as far as I know, the term ger tzedek does not exist anywhere in the Bible. It's a Second Temple period or rabbinic term, which means a person who fully converted to Judaism and is what the Bible calls ezrach haaretz, ke'ezrach haaretz, and then a ger toshav, which is what the Bible calls basically a toshav or a sachir or any of these types of people.
A good guy.
A person who has not converted to Judaism, is only keeping some things, and usually today is understood as being, or in the Talmud is understood as being a person who keeps the Noahide laws. However, because there is actually no evidence of such a thing called Noahide laws in the Torah, this concept of a ger is a purely Jewish invention. This ger toshav is purely a Jewish invention, which really came to solve a different problem. And what is the problem it came to solve? It came to solve the problem of the half-converts. During the times of the Second Temple period, when the Hellenistic world came in touch with the Jewish world, people started keeping bits and pieces of the Torah to an extent that for hundreds, if not thousands of years later, they were still polemicizing in the European world about these people who were keeping Shabbat. And all those people who were keeping Shabbat or keeping laws of kashrut and so on, like, for example, you find, I think, with the Mennonites, either Mennonites or Amish, they have rules, for example, about not eating blood. I saw this, for example, once there was this, someone was interviewing an Amish, and they talked about it. They said the Torah says so and so, but they're not really keeping Torah; they're only keeping bits and pieces of it. So the Ger Toshav,
cafeteria plan.
Yeah, the Ger Toshav basically was a group of people who were practicing bits and pieces of Torah very, very similar to what we find today with some groups of people who were first introduced to the Torah, and they don't have a full understanding of everything. So you find these people here and there who are keeping Shabbat or keeping kosher and so on, but they're not fully exposed to the idea of what Torah is, or they're not really interested in being fully exposed to what Torah is. They want to keep only parts of it.
When you say Torah, I think you're meaning their instructions that came and grew out of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay. The reason I asked the question.
By the way, the word Torah is used to mean instructions. It can also mean instructions of a prophet. We find that as well. Okay? You about to say something?
Okay. And the reason I was asking the question is, it seemed that I heard you say that that the term ger toshav and subsequently ger tzaddik is given by the rabbinic Judaism to those who have not necessarily taken on the full mantle of their Judaism. So since the Bible doesn't necessarily use these terms in this way, they're the ones who are saying you're not doing what we do, so we're calling you a ger toshav.
Exactly.
That's what I thought you were trying to describe.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I believe
that
the category of the ger toshav was created to give some kind of a labeling. Not the ger tzedek, just the ger toshav. The ger tzedek was used to describe someone who fully converted. I believe that the ger toshav was a category invented during the Second Temple period after Judaism was exposed, or people who were not Israelites, who were not Jewish, were exposed to this thing called Judaism, or exposed to this thing called Torah. Torah became something which was written in other languages, like, for example, Greek, which means other people can read it. Jews of Alexandria, for example, did not really speak much Hebrew, so they actually translated the Torah into Greek. The translation was done by the Jewish community of Alexandria. The whole story about Ptolemies is probably not true. Maybe Ptolemies was interested, so he wanted to commission a copy of it, but I don't think the translation came from there. I think it's more of a legend than anything else. But the Torah was translated into other languages, and other people could read it, and they were very intrigued by it. A Shabbat? Seriously? A day of rest? I'm on for that. So people say keeping bits and pieces of the Torah. So what they wanted to do is to give some structure to this practice, some structure to this idea, to give these people some kind of an identification, so they'll be able to be characterized in some way instead of being these hovering pieces of people with different practices. They said, "Oh, you want to be close to us, but you don't want to fully convert? Here's something you can follow." But they removed practices which are literal in the Torah, and they started putting other things which were more, if you look at it, more things to govern people in everyday life, and also to respect the God of Israel. This is why blasphemy is one of the things forbidden there. Murder is more of an issue of human government, of governing one another to be able to live with one another. Stealing is another one. Adultery is another one. Most of them having courts. Most of these laws, if you look up closely, don't really carry almost any theological content except for blasphemy and idolatry. So we have idolatry and blasphemy. They're the only ones that really carry a theological meaning. The rest of them are just normal laws I think most normal countries have, even back then in the world they lived in, which was a big mess. Okay, so
kind of like a Cliff Notes version of love God, no idolatry, no blasphemy, and love your neighbor, and all the rest of it has to do with, seems like a Cliff Notes of the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, it's like a component of the entire Torah, I am the God thy Lord, or Shema Yisrael Adonai Echad, and Ve'afta l'reacha kamocha, love thy neighbor as thyself. I'm going to be very blunt. There was a certain individual that said something very, very similar, and I think he was 100% right when he said that. I've been saying it for years not even knowing that specific individual said this.
Sure.
So,
I mean, hey, Torah is Torah. If somebody quotes Torah, it's Torah.
Yeah, if someone quotes Torah, it's Torah, period. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Accept truth from where...
Exactly. If a pig quoted Torah, it's Torah.
Yeah, well...
Yeah.
Sorry. I had a funny image of a pig with a yarmulke. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it matches some of the books that have come out in the last year or two.
Okay, but the point is, accept the truth from he who said it. If someone says something truth, it doesn't really matter where that person comes from. So in time, they had these Greeks or Hellenized people who showed up at the synagogues and were listening to the Torah reading and were listening to the discussions, and they were trying to keep pieces of the Torah, not the whole thing, because you have to understand that in the Greek and Roman world, the moment you start keeping laws of another group of people, it's almost kind of like treason. This is why the Romans at one point took a lot of issue with Christians, because the Christians were basically rebelling against the nationalistic religion, or the national religion, which carried with it nationalistic ideas, and therefore Christians were persecuted because they were suspected as unabiding to the law, which by the way many of them were, and uninterested in in the social structure of the rest of the people that surrounds them, which means they actually are a danger to Roman society.
Mm-hmm. They were unwilling to what do you call it? What's that, Lisa? Comply.
Exactly.
Yes, they were unwilling to comply.
Yeah, they were unwilling to comply to Roman law. And with Judaism, I wouldn't say it was the exact same thing, because these people were not persecuted by Jews, but the problem was that you had to give these people a definition, because if they show up and do whatever they want, it creates a complete disruption of everything. So Rabbi said, these people don't want to fully convert to Judaism. We'll give them some kind of a category. They won't be able to practice Judaism and cause trouble in the synagogues. However, they will be allowed to show up and listen and so on, but they'll be, how to put it without being, too crude, they'll be labeled as non-Jews who are willing to follow certain things. But I think that the whole concept of how Ger is presented today is not even biblical. It just has to do with just a problematic, in their perspective, a problematic reality that they were dealing with and trying to resolve that problem.
It seems like it has expanded from, people don't want to be called Noahide, so let's enhance or let's update the category to include people who are, and now you're describing somebody that back in the days of Christianity in Israel and Christianity in the Roman Empire, that those people were also treated with respect somewhat in the synagogues, as long as they played nice in the synagogue, which is kind of seems similar to what's going on now. If you play nice in the synagogue, we respect you. We'll call you a ger tashab. But we're always the sons of the bondwoman. We're always sons of the handmaid. We're not sons of Leah. It seems that we never really achieve full status. Some people accept us because we desire to serve and love God. But as a general rule, it seems like Judaism still treats us as the sons of, the handmaids.
So that's one of the problems that I have with this. First of all, there are two problems that I see here. First of all, the disrespect that some people give to people who convert to Judaism or people who are not fully converted yet. It's very disrespectful. This person has chosen from their own will to abandon their entire life, or not entire life, but abandon the world they came from, which can cause a lot of tension.
Their family in a lot of cases.
Their families in a lot of cases as well. My friend who was raised a Catholic, they had to bring in the priest to calm down the grandmother to tell her that he won't be going to hell. Okay? And the thing is that when you go around calling someone, look, this guy is a ger, it's very disrespectful. He is one of us now. So promoting this idea of calling someone a ger, I personally think is very, very insulting. The other side of it as well is there are plenty of people out there, now I'm going to be banging on the table, there are plenty of people out there who have committed to the fulfillment of the Torah in its fullest meaning. They are keeping Torah, everything. They are committed, they've isolated themselves from the world they came from. They've estranged themselves from people that they grew up with. They are willing to keep the entire Torah. They show at a doorstep and we say, nah, be a Noahide.
Yeah.
Nah, whatever you've been doing, it's a lot of nonsense. How dare you? You need to take that person, bring them in, say, you're one of us as we speak, and we're just going to tweak some of the ideas that you have. This idea of promoting calling people a ger, and this idea of promoting that you cannot be an Israelite unless you go through our process is insulting. You know what? Put them through the process. Not a problem. Take them through the conversion process in Judaism. However, don't talk to them as if they don't know what they're talking about. Yes, I will disagree with some of these people as well in the way they interpret Torah and some of the perspective they have in understanding the Torah. But you have to show these people, and I'm not saying that people are disrespectful deliberately. I do not think for even 1 second, not 1 second whatsoever that any of these people, rabbis or people who help and so on, I don't think for even 1 second that these people are intending to be disrespectful. I think that they handle a lot of these people in a very respectful way. But I think from looking at the process of what a convert is in the Bible and the perspective of how it was done in times of Moses and onwards until the problems that developed in the Second Temple period, the way it was done, what it means to call a person by this name in its historical meaning, and the way that a conversion was really done, I think that we need to take these people who are keeping Torah and give them a status of an Israelite automatically. As long as they're not breaking any fundamental laws of Torah by practicing pagan practices or anything like that, we are to accept these people because they've fulfilled the basic requirement that Maimonides says, which is to tell them bits of the Torah, tell them some of it, and then educate them later on. I think that to go around and tell people you're not an Israelite is just historically untrue.
Sure. Amen. Now, I want to key on something you said earlier. We're talking about hair. And that
hair.
You had told the rabbi that you were that you were obeying him because you were in his house. You were under his tutelage. And you chose to be under his tutelage, therefore you choose to obey him regardless of his reasoning that may or may not be biblically based. You were there, so you were going to abide by his rules. I think that's something that I'd like to key on here based upon what you just said as well. Within Israel, there is Judaism, in my understanding. Judaism is an aspect or a group within Israel that has maintained an identity for generations and millennia, and praise God that they have done that. But Israel is in God's eyes the goal. Judaism, I think, is a subset within that, and if you desire to become a part of Judaism, then that is a perfectly acceptable, as far as I think God is concerned, way for you to go. However, once you are part of Israel, in God's eyes, you are Israel. And I think that's what people who are hearing this today, probably most of them who are listening to this today, feel like they're in limbo. They feel like they have to go into Judaism in order to please God, and they aren't necessarily comfortable with just being Israel because there's no structure for them to, interact with other people. So there's an awful lot of people out there today who just don't know what to do. So, do you agree with my assumption or my idea that Israel is the goal and Judaism is a subset within Israel? That if you choose to go that route, that's fine, but you're already Israel by that point.
That's really what I've been building up to. I think, in my opinion, I think that it's better off sometimes to belong to a structure. However, I do not think it's a necessity in this case. The problem that I am having here, I think the main issue that I'm taking with this whole thing is the fact that people are being demoted by the practices done in Judaism to say, though you've been keeping the full Torah, at least in the way you understand it as an individual, may it be through a Karaite perspective or a pseudo-Jewish perspective or a fully Jewish perspective, and to turn around to them and say to them, we're demoting you to a status of a Noachide or a status of a partial keeping of the Torah, and we're going to label you as a ger, is just very, very, very unfair. Because these people are committed to the keeping of the Torah. So I find it to be very, very unfair. I think that if a person decides that they want to follow Judaism because they think that it gives a better structure and so on, I agree. I was born into it, and I understand the importance of the structure. I mean, for years there, for example, I didn't follow some structures in Judaism, and it turned into a bit of a chaos. It alienated me from the rest of the people that live around me. It caused some trouble with family and friends and so on. So I prefer to follow some of the structures and return to some of the practices of Orthodox Judaism and ignore some of my own understanding because it gives structure, and there's a need to belong. There's nothing you can really do about it. But to go around...
Right. Fellowship's really important to our daily lives.
But to go around, and I get into trouble even to saying what I'm saying in here in this program. I mean, I know that, if it leaks out, some people would go like, snub you, or we don't like you anymore. One of my brother's wives heard some of the programs that I do, and I was sitting there, she said, I heard your programs, and I'm like, okay. And her response was, cool, No, because
nice.
that was different because she also, she studied Judaism and history and so on. So she hasn't done a degree like I did with specifically, biblical studies and ancient history, but still she took classes that dealt with these things, so she's well aware. I think the biggest fear was from her husband, who's turning into a rabbi. He and I have had some pretty serious disagreements, but we're still brothers, so we love each other.
That's good. Hey, that's a good lesson for all of us.
So I'm not saying it's totally bad. I really, to really say I completely disagree with you, I really have to sit there and read everything that these people are saying, these wonderful people are saying about the convert and seeing if there are really any specifics I disagree with. But as an overall idea, if I understood this whole thing correctly, there's this demotion of people from full-fledged Torah keepers to being a ger and promoting this Noachide thing, which I have to say is a lot of nonsense because it does not appear in the Bible. It's a Jewish thing, and if you want to abide to Judaism, great. However, I do not see any evidence whatsoever in the Bible that this is something God expects from mankind. And I think that the Bible, at the end of the day, is the highest authority. Without going into the whole discussion about the authority of rabbis and so on, and the authority of oral law, which I've already expressed my opinion about the subject. I think it gives structure, but I also think that it's going a little bit haywire in some places. It's a whole discussion by itself, and I usually give these discussions as a scholar, not as a practicing Jew. I have to separate. It's like a friend of mine happens to be a Samaritan, I asked him about the conflict of being a scholar and being a religious man. And he said, he's an elderly man. He said, I have to separate one from the other. As a scholar, I say this. As a practicing Israelite, I say this. It was interesting, an interesting idea. Yeah. So
I can understand that.
So you see that there is always a conflict in what I'm saying here, at least for me, because I'm attacking something which is part of the world I grew up in. However, as a person that deals with people who are really coming into the keeping of the Torah specifically from the perspective of Tanakh, the people that start off as Messianic, as Torah-keeping Christians and so on, whatever process they went through, if they're Torah keepers now or not Torah, or if they still believe in this or that, it's not the point. The point is that the moment the person commits himself to the keeping of the Torah, you cannot demote them because you have some kind of technicality, because the person has not gone through a specific process of conversion. I think it's a very, very disrespectful thing to say, especially from a biblical perspective, without being disrespectful to all these wonderful people who are doing outreach for people who want to know Judaism. But to go around and say this is the only answer we have and this is the only truth is just, I'm sorry, as a Jew who grew up in Judaism, has practiced Judaism his entire life, who went to yeshiva and so on, I know that there's a lot more than that.
In 5 minutes or less.
This has been a very long program to begin with.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. So we're closing it out with this. In 5 minutes or less, tell me this, please. From a contextual position, just what does the text say? What is actually required in order for you to participate in a Passover? From a textual position, not from Judaism, not from anything outside of just the context. What do you think that says?
Circumcision of all the males. The full acceptance of the Torah, circumcision, showing up at the temple and saying and explaining who you are and having someone help you out with the whole process and just doing it. And the moment you do the Passover, that's it. There's not really much to it. It was a very simple process. They never had these complex processes like we have today. There was no no mikveh. There was no trimming of hair of women like the Karaites do. There's nothing. There's just coming forth. Probably people who did this had a family or someone they were involved with, a friend or something that told them how it's supposed to be done, showing up with that friend with your own animal, doing the Passover, or joining that friend of yours with the Passover sacrifice as part of that person's household, because you don't really have a household of your own as a non-Israelite, doing the Passover and waking up in the morning with a kosher stamp on your back by the Badat Zaidah Haredit, saying now you're one of the Israelites. A kosher tattoo.
So you're yeah, right.
That's all it is.
When you in this description, it seems to be that description is more in the time frame of a temple, whereas in the original introduction of this concept in this recording, we talked about it from Exodus 12. Now, at some point, Exodus 12 doesn't necessarily include acceptance to any number of dogma. It seems to only talk about they have to want to be there and they have to be circumcised. That seems to be the basic requirement there. So what you've described seems to be more practical applications during the Davidic or the temple times. What do you think is required today? Which one of those two do you think we have to do today?
Well, obviously you have to do circumcision, physical circumcision of the flesh. We can go into the whole debate. I have the opinion, I do hold of the opinion that there's actually nothing preventing us from doing a Passover today.
Something that, let me throw this out while you're saying that. Lisa put it in my ear to remind me that Passover is the one feast that we're commanded to memorialize.
Exactly.
And and going back to something you said earlier, that they had an expectation in the days of Egypt for God to fulfill His promise. And Jeremiah, we have an expectation that we're told that there's going to be another event. So I'm wondering if we shouldn't expect in the end times an idea of this Passover, and the only thing that's going to be required is for you to want to be there and for you to want to be cut. That's kind of what I'm trying to get to.
Well, I'm going to say, like I said earlier when you promoted this idea, I said, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, maybe there are patterns in the world. They might repeat themselves. There might be a massive Passover to celebrate the redemption of Israel. There might not be. I have no idea. And I don't want to say something I don't know. However, in our world today, where no one practices doing the Passover, though I have been having discussions throughout the past couple of years about this idea with the Samaritans and a whole bunch of other people and so on, then even the Talmud goes in the tract of Psachim talks about if the majority of Israel are unclean, we still do the Passover. And the only thing really limiting us today is the issue of doing it at the temple. But even there, I can start arguing Judean ideology and so on. It's a whole subject by itself. I think that there actually is evidence that you can do the Passover without a temple. You do public altars. It's a whole mess. I'm not going to go into it now. I'm just going to leave you hanging there and thinking about it. However, for those who want to follow the practice today of Judaism, but want to do something similar to Passover, all you do is join a family for a Seder night, and you are commemorating the idea. I mean, I decided in my own household that from now on, every Seder night, no matter what the cost is, we're always going to have lamb, and we're always going to do it the way the Torah describes it. We're going to have matzot, melorim, and something which commemorates the Passover sacrifice. And that's the way we're going to do it. We're going to commemorate as much as we can. If a movement develops to do a Passover, even if there's no temple, I might join that group. I don't know. But I think that the simplest way to do it today is, I think the best way will be to come to Israel, do a Passover here in Israel with the family, and do a commemoration of the Passover. And I think that by biblical law, that person would be considered an Israelite.
I would have to agree with that. That even though
open house in my home and Passover.
Yeah, right. There you
kidding.
go.
No,
we'll have a grand memorial this coming Passover at Yoel's house, and all those who attend will no longer be Ger, but shall be Israel.
Yeah, with no actual authority, you won't be able to prove anything. But
right.
I had a friend.
But you can say it.
I had two families that came over this last Pesach, Chag HaMatzot. They spent time with us, and we had lamb on the table and so on. And I turned around to them, and these people were not Jewish. I turned around to them and said to them, based on biblical law, you have now entered the Israelite people. I am sanctifying this as a Levite. No, but I was being half joking, but I was also a little bit serious about it. And at least one of them was very touched by it.
I would be as well, even though in saying that, but it's only a memorial.
Yeah, and I want to point out something very important. There has to be some kind of order. So, whatever I'm saying here, a lot of it is just theoretical. One of the things that I point out to people is that I present an idea. However, I always say this is theoretical. I do not have authority. Yes, I am a Levite. By laws of the Torah, I have authority over things by me making a decision. However, the problem is that we don't live in that world, the world of ideals, and therefore whatever I say will not receive authority, because authority comes from acceptance of people accepting the idea. However, if a massive number of people accept an idea as being the truth and the way to do it, it receives authority. And therefore, if someone turns around, if 10,000 people turn around and say, well, we accept your authority, or 1,000 people, we accept your authority, then it does become authoritative, because really the point, authority is just social acceptance and really nothing else, because at the end of the day, the Torah says, priests and Levites are the authority over the Torah, and not people called rabbis. Sorry.
So this could be the beginning of the Passover ideology, where the Ger becomes Israel.
Yeah, but at the end of
But again, this is a memorial.
Yeah.
The idea of Passover is a memorial, and that's another reason, again, going back to the idea of the possibility of future events, that we're memorializing something that won't be finalized, just as you mentioned, until the authority is in place to finalize it.
Yeah, exactly. So just to make the point, a lot of what I just said here the last 10 minutes, a lot of it's theoretical. I'm not calling for people, usurping authority and so on. Right. But a lot of people also go around with this title rabbi, and even these people, I can doubt their authority as well. Being a rabbi is a lot more than just getting a piece of paper from the chief rabbinate or something like that, or being called rabbi. It's a lot more complex than that.
And again, it's a subset of what the goal is anyway. Goal is to be Israel.
Yeah, by the way, originally people who were ordained as rabbis, they had to be pretty serious, when this is, because the thing is, anyone can go and study, for example, Yore, if they're skilled enough to learn Yore and get a title called rabbi. I mean, I can go do it. I'm dead serious. I can actually go do it. Give me 6 months, I'll go to the exam and I can get ordained as a rabbi. However, I don't.
We have a term. We have a term in the industry I came out of, where we call them paper tigers, people who would take exams just to get a title, but they have no idea what to do when they sit in front of a keyboard. And I think every religion, in every job, in every aspect of life, we can see paper tigers, people who just have a title but really can't wield a sword. So
the thing is, there are plenty of people who go around with what we call smicha. However,
authority or being authorized by.
Smicha is the covering of the hands over one's head, and there are a lot of people go around with this title of smicha. However, to be a rabbi is also to be a talmid chacham, and that's a completely different category. I actually spent time with rabbis who were big talmidei chachamim, people who are really, in depth of everything. And these were people I was willing to call rabbi. Not these 25, 30-year-old kids who go out and get a certified,
not paper tigers.
Get certified as a rabbi, like, for example, in certain movement happens. But not even, sometimes you also got people who are elderly, their 50s, 60s, who were ordained as rabbis, but they never actually were practicing rabbis. So even there, it's very questionable how much authority they actually have. Not questioning the fact that they received this document that says that they're rabbis and they've been studying for many years and so on, and they passed all the requirements. However, it's a lot more than that. I mean, when I sat with my father, who actually is a practicing rabbi, and he's ordained and he actually has a community and so on, we talked about it, and he said to me that it's very upsetting. My dad's almost 65 years old, and he said to me, it's very upsetting that you come to these communities and they have this 35-year-old kid who's a rabbi, and he has no real practicality of how to be a rabbi. And my dad said, they can give the person the document, but it has to, the final document has to be given at least after 10 years of actually being a practicing rabbi. So the thing is that you have to be very careful with the title rabbi. And again, it's very important for me to point this out. I'm not talking against anyone specific. I'm saying there's an issue with authority, and there's a whole problem here. And I don't intend undermining any rabbi or anyone, but I am willing to express my disagreement sometimes on things that are said and done. That's all it really is. I'm not. People also take a very one of the very sad syndromes in religion is that people take a stand and they actually become very aggressive, and it's not my intent here either. My intent here is if you want to have the biblical perspective of this subject, here's the biblical perspective. You want a rabbinic perspective, that's rabbinic perspective. It's your choice which one of them you see as authoritative. That's it. That's really all it is. Sure. However, because because I don't see enough of the other opinion out there, I just said I think it's important to at least enable people to know that there's a choice. Beautiful.
Well, Yoel, I really want to thank you for the time. This program has been just outstanding in explaining some things that I've been trying to vocalize to people for some time. So I really appreciate you going through this with us. So, folks, if you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me, jeff@talkingtorah.org. You can go to Yoel's Facebook page, Hebrew in Israel. You can get to his